it wasn't like we were going to get booked at these big things. And so I thought like, well, maybe I'll just like throw a party for me and my, my band. Like we'll have a little thing out in the woods.
This is Champagne is Also a Band podcast. One songwriter, one song. I'm Sven, your host for a journey into the music of Champaign-Urbana. Recorded in the Blue Box studio with a songwriter from the Champaign-Urbana music scene, past or present. Champagne is Also a Band podcast is a member of the Champagne Showers Podcast Network. Welcome to Champagne is Also a Band podcast. Today, my guest is someone that you may know from Neoga Blacksmith, Primitive Lights, Vestiges, and Waterfowl. Brad Olson, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Sven. Thanks for having me.
As I caught him mid sip on the delicious Budweiser.
I really should have been better prepared. You were reading the intro.
No, it's all good. So today we're going to be listening to the song Formaldehyde off the album Piasa. Without further ado, as I like to say, let's listen to the song. Welcome back. As always, my favorite first question is, what came first, the music or the lyrics?
This case, it was pretty clear it was the music, and that's, I think, something that a lot of the Neoga Blacksmith stuff is pretty much just derived as music and riffs or chord progressions first. We do a lot of just jamming in the garage and recording bits and pieces on like a little handheld or something. And for me, like, at least I know, like, lyrics is definitely something I struggle with a lot. I never quite know how to approach a song, and I tend to labor over it a lot. I guess I'm never quite sure what to say. You know, what's the story I want to tell? What is it I really want to communicate? And so for me, like, it's a lot easier to just kind of like play a melody or something, and I'll like, you know, I might sit with something like a half a melody in my head for years and never quite know what words are actually going to go with it.
Okay.
Are you familiar with like Paul McCartney and like how he wrote songs?
Well, I've heard of Paul McCartney.
Are you familiar with him? He was in a band called the Beatles. They were, like back in the 40s or something.
Yes. Yes.
No, so like the song Yesterday, he had the melody and worked out, and the placeholder lyrics that he'd put in were like scrambled eggs, eggs. And I do something similar, although it's mostly just nonsense syllables or things like that. I kind of have an idea of what the vocal line will sound like, or if there's a hook or something. And so I tend to write in that way. And I have just honestly, like I said, have a really hard time sometimes thinking about, like, well, what is this actually song going to be about? So this one particularly, though, it definitely came from the riff first, and it was in a period, we were planning to write this album, and Matt had been writing a bunch of stuff, and I was struggling, as usual, to kind of come up with something of my own. And he, I believe, came up with this kind of lead riff that you hear in this song that kind of drives each of these verses and the musical interludes in between. And I think we played around with it, just kind of jamming on it. We came up with some fake name for it and put it in the Google Drive. And it just kind of sat there for a while. And I probably stuck a flag in it for my own and said, like, well, I brought some lyrics in, or said like, oh, I'm going to write some lyrics for this. And at this point, it became easier. Like, we were playing this song along with the song on the album that precedes it. It's called Katie, and that's one that Matt Wade wrote. And so for me, lyrically, there was a very vivid story about like an automobile accident kills this young woman, right? And a lot of these songs I felt like were shaping up to be kind of story songs, and so I wanted to see some kind of interweaving between them. And so I suppose this song was kind of inspired lyrically or connecting to that one as well, since they do connect sort of together. So this would be like Act 2, you know, in a sense of that first song. But
did you write that line in between the verses, kind of this interlude part that you're playing with the guitar?
The faster, higher pitched one.
Yeah,
that's Matt. He came up with that one. He might have come up with both of them, honestly. And we kind of like, that tends to happen in the garage. And now we have like 3 guitarists in the band.
Yeah,
and so somebody might come up with something, and then in order to fit other people in, you know, they might come up with another thing in a different position or a different register. And so he would have come up with that part. What I'm playing is the part that's got like the little bit of a wah pedal effect on it.
Yeah.
The little bit lower, kind of more repetitive, lower register line.
I guess I brought that to the forefront just because it's something that's very, very distinctive about this song. And in fact, when I saw Neoga Blacksmith for maybe the first time, I feel like that was the song that kind of stuck with me, because it's this, I don't know, for some reason, I feel like that's a sense of agitation. Like that sound is
a little,
where it's kind of like, it would be the sound, I think, that would be going through my head if I were pacing back and forth and I couldn't settle down, couldn't sit, couldn't
because
rest.
It is just this repetition of 2 notes, or maybe it probably ends on this punctuated third, like, you know, the 5th or whatever it is that alternates in there. But
the thing that struck me about this song is that it does feel all about like this frustration. At least to me, it feels like frustration. But the thing that I find interesting is that the rhythm section, the bass line, is just continually driving forward. Like, there's not really a stop to that. It just keeps going, you know. And you mentioned that this was about a car accident, someone dying. I don't know if you said if somebody was dying, but,
unofficially. I mean, like in that vein, it's about death, for sure, in at least a metaphorical sense, if not literal. But
the song itself kind of starts off with this big kind of like crash, with the drums, and then it just drives. So I think about tragic things that happen in our lives, and it's always like that, right? Where something horrible happens, and then there's not a time to really recover. It's just because it's so tragic, it's a loss that you don't get the opportunity to ever stop thinking about it, or it just keeps driving. And I think between that bass line and the drums kind of going forward constantly, and then these little agitator lines, should I call them, if I can refer to it that way, kind of sets this mood of like, how does one deal with it?
I think if you had to look at it in like a really literal way, it's written from the perspective of a guy who is dealing with a loss, of the person that he loved, and is basically, essentially, like you're saying, like pacing around the room, trying to figure out any way to bring her back. And so, like in his sort of like middle school, mystical sort of sense, turns to these pseudo witchcraft rituals or whatever it is, that are alluded to more in that second verse. But
yeah, I was going to point out, I did feel like that, drew a pentagram in crayon on the kitchen floor. It is that kind of that middle school kind of feel to it. It just, to me, I always think of it as like, it has no forethought. It's like it's the first thing that he came across, and he's just like, I'm just going to grab this. So again, that whole driving thing of like, what can I do? And I can't figure out how to make this
person
better.
Come back. How do I get out of this situation? And so like, I'm going to turn to whatever, like what I think what might work, some occult thing, that's all I can imagine will work at this point. And the crayon is, when I started that verse, I remember really feeling like I'm pretty like critical of my writing a lot, and then even after the fact, listening to a song or thinking about the lyrics that I wrote down, I often feel like, oh, I could have done better, or I could have come up with something, but that was maybe more vivid or evocative of whatever. But when I remember very vividly like writing this verse and just feeling like every line was unlocking more and more to this picture, and started to like really take shape in my mind about who this character was. So like the idea of having crayon, drawing the pentagram in crayon on the kitchen floor, informs later that, well, there's a kid that's in the mix, and that's why there's crayons around, right? I was searching and searching for words that would rhyme with well, because I have this habit of like not knowing what the first word of a line or a verse should be. And so when I realized that 12 would kind of half rhyme with well, I remember having the thought of like, well, how would 12 fit into this scene? And I had this just kind of image in my mind of that oven clock that flashes 12 o'clock because it's like the power's been shut off, or there's been something that it's been raining, maybe there's been a power outage. And so it was little details like that. Writing that was a lot more fun to me than maybe some of my other approaches to songwriting, which in the past had been maybe more personal, or trying not to be too personal, and this was just having fun, like painting a picture that seemed really interesting to me. And I had a love for like zombie movies and things like this. So I kind of envisioned this, like, if I was to like, shoot a picture of this song, it would be in black and white, very much like, Night of the Living Dead sort of, this old farmhouse, or like, ranch home or something out in kind of a string town with rain on the windows and this pentagram on the floor in crayon, and kids' toys maybe off in the den or something, but kind of a bleak scene for a guy who's found himself suddenly without a partner or a mother to the kid or whatever it is.
So the second verse is like your favorite verse out of this? Or?
I'd say, for sure. I mean, like, I think it's probably the favorite thing I've ever written. It's the one, like, I think verse that I can look at and be kind of proud of, and not be like, oh, cringy a little bit, like, oh, come on, man. But yeah, I mean, like, it's probably, I really like it a lot. I think it works, and I've had a lot of people kind of tell me that, so that kind of helps the ego a little bit in the way that it's been received. A lot of my friends who are songwriters that I respect a lot, you know, mention this song or that line in particular.
So one of the things that I was thinking about as I was listening to this and writing up my notes is, how do I say this? So if this is telling a story, in terms of the subject of the story, where do you think this person is, or how they, and I'm trying to ask this in the right way because it's the way I think about it, is where do you think they reside, like, mentally? Mm-hmm. Like, are they still going back to the, you know, the sole survivor son of a bitch, or are they thinking about how to resurrect this person over and over, or this is completely theoretical in a certain sense, but I was really curious, like, if that were your perspective, where would you be in that?
Well, I think that's, you know, that's not something I think I probably took into account when writing it, but that each verse kind of gets at a different response to grief. I think it does. You know, the first one is about blaming, like, another person a little bit, you know, or maybe denial even, and then the second one is about bargaining or trying to come up with some arrangement that's going to, like, solve this. And the final verse is like refusal to believe, or maybe even acceptance in a way. I don't know. I mean, like, the idea that it just don't make no goddamn sense when you're only 6 feet deep is like kind of a resignful acceptance of the situation or something, is to acknowledge that something just doesn't make sense sometimes. I just see, like, a picture of a really manic person who can't, you know, and that's kind of the stages of grief, right? It's like it's not like you get through one and then you're done, you know?
Right.
You know, you'll bounce back and forth between these sorts of responses, and you may not fully ever rest. You'll feel these things kind of, you know, coming back. So this whole ritual that he set up in the second verse, the pentagram on the floor and the records and the drugstore wine, like, you know, these things didn't work clearly, but, you know, I don't know that he won't try them again.
Right. Well, and I think that's interesting that it seems that that second verse, that the records on the folding chair are like a reality, or something that's left behind by this person. And I mean, you could say, and a picture in a lock of your hair, but, you know, we grow our hair and it's just dead.
Yeah, sure.
And pictures is not really us, but I feel like that remembrance of a person, and
it's about the thing, it's about their personality a bit, and these things like that. And, you know, that kind of led me, like, springboard into the production of this song, like that idea of records. Like, I don't know if it's very hidden back there in that interlude in between after that verse, but there's a little bit of backmasking. And so I don't know, we can't do this on the air, but there's a famous Beatles song that is sung in the backmasking that deals with the idea of, like, grasping for having someone back.
Okay.
So if you play it backwards there, you might be able to catch it. But
I even have a note in here. I'm like, what are you saying?
Well, you'll have to play it backwards and find out, you know.
All right.
But it, you know, it's a Beatles song, and, you know, that was something fun to come. I've always wanted to put, like, that back, and that goes back to this whole idea of, like, what would a guy who really didn't pay attention to anything outside of, like, middle school, early high school, you know, how would he produce a song, or what would he think would be, like, really, like, a ritual to enact? Would be, like, you know, playing her favorite songs backwards, or looking for some kind of message or meaning, I suppose.
Do you have a favorite line in this song?
I don't know about, you know, a favorite line. You know, I'd have to go back to just that second verse. I think all works really well together. I think it has some of my favorite images. Chicken blood on the door. It's just fun to say. Yeah. It just is like one of those, you know, collections of words that I somehow stumbled across that just kind of fits in the song. And, yeah, like I said, it's just fun to say. Like, it comes out of the mouth really, you know, easily and nicely, and is dark and evocative and weird and rural in its own way. And
did you research or look up any spells or anything? Okay,
no,
this is like, curious.
This you know, this is my you know, when I keep referring to this guy as having, like, a middle school mystical mentality, like, it's mine, right? I mean, like, these are the things if I believed any of that, you know, that I might do, I suppose, or that, you know, it's what I would think of. What are some of, like, the legends about, like, musicians selling their souls or things or whatever it is. Like, that was really appealing to me as a kid. But I was always interested in sort of the supernatural from just like an academic sense even. I mean, like, I never believed in a lot of superstitions and stuff, but I find it really fascinating the way that these things are crafted and kind of passed down and how they might change. And I'm approaching it from that mindset where it's really kind of like, what do I find interesting about that world?
Let me back up just a little bit and say, so I'm just curious because this popped into my head is, where do you think those rumors come from where it's like, Eric Clapton sold his soul and, there was that whole rumor that he made the deal and that he would lose his firstborn son and then he lost
and then
his son.
Is that really? Yeah.
And I just wonder if that stems from not a sense of jealousy. That may not be the right
I don't think it, it may not just, but it's almost reverence. It's almost like if we see somebody with talent that seems like otherworldly or impossible to achieve or that we cannot place within our grasp, it's maybe easier for us to be like, oh, well, there's something supernatural going on here. But that particularly has been a tradition of music since before Clapton. Robert Johnson was like probably arguably the first, but I have to imagine that comes from an older tradition of that, stories of people, not necessarily for musical talent, but like selling their soul or making some sort of sacrifice like that. I would imagine across cultures is probably something that's shared. And I don't know, it's an interesting question about like, why do we attach to stories like that?
When did Neoga Blacksmith come about?
I don't even know if I know the year anymore. I think it's like 2006 or 7. It's been some time. I must have been like 20 or 21 or something, 21 at least for sure. I would just been like recording stuff in my bedroom in this apartment on campus that was like run down, lived with a few buddies, but I had a lot of free time back then. And so this MySpace was around, and so I had like a little, page up there that I would sit in my room and I would pretty much just multi-track stuff. I had my drum set there, which I'm sure the neighbors loved, but in this, brick apartment building with, 20 units around me. But, I would do drum tracks and there's a lot of covers. There's some original stuff I was working on, but I would put them all up on this, MySpace page. And I got a message through there from this account on there. It was Neoga Blacksmith. And I didn't know who it was from, but remarked about how they liked my songs and I listened to theirs. And it turned out it was Matt Wade. We were from Monticello together. Gotcha. And so he asked me if I would want to play in a band with him. And so we got together and we had our friend Evan Smith playing piano. And so I was drumming at that point. So it was me on drums and Evan on piano and Matt on guitar. And then I think shortly thereafter, we brought my friend Tony Ewald in to play bass. I've always had a thing about like bands with no bass.
Right.
It can be done pretty well, but I love the sound of a good round low end,
Yeah, absolutely.
Really filled things out, particularly in the country sort of style. I feel like that kind of nice bass sort of adds a lot to the balance. And so that was that. Okay. And it's evolved, there's been more members in and out over the years. But basically it's been me and Matt and Tony essentially since the beginning, with some people coming in and out. But
yeah. We don't, do you want to talk about loss at all? Or,
I mean, I think that's appropriate in terms of the song being about loss. And for me, this is an interesting story. So just to put it in terms of like what the song actually, how I might feel about it. I have a friend of mine who I went to Monticello High School with, who became a mortician. We'd played like a show at the Iron Post once, and she came out, and I remembered her saying like, "Oh, I heard you had you played a song of yours about necrophilia, and I'm sorry that I missed it." And but in a sense, like he does want this dead zombie body back, not necessarily for any sexual sort of connotations, but just to fill that void, right? And my friend Clayton Dearing, I remember, was standing right there, And he'd said something like, well, I don't know that it's about like that. It just seems like it's about longing or loss to me. And like, that's definitely what it's about to me. It's like, it's not about, expecting this to actually work or, anything like that. It's about like, what do you do when you're confronted by loss? And so it is interesting, featured on this song, playing electric piano is my friend Kyle, who came in and started playing with us a few years after we formed. Our keyboardist at that time, Evan, moved out to Arizona as his wife was finishing medical school out there. And we were looking for somebody else to come in and play keys. And so Matt was very, very good friends with Kyle for a very long time, since high school. They were like best buds, and Kyle, I guess, was back around and available at that time. And so he came in, and he was just like, it was very clear, like from the beginning, like he and Matt had this dynamic of like songwriting and just knowing each other as friends that made it very easy to have him work with. And he was just immensely talented, and recorded a lot with us. And, on this album, he does, I think, phenomenally. And some of the things, that I'm most in awe about is listening to some of his keys work. And particularly on this song, there is a solo that he just, rips off, like I think it's after that second verse in the instrumental break. And for me, I was thinking about this. I was listening to the song earlier this week to prep and think about like, well, what would I want to like say about it? And like that solo is one of my favorite things I think I've ever heard recorded on any of our albums, because knowing like how it was produced, like even, it was a one take thing for him, and he could just do that, right? That was not composed in any way. He was just immensely talented. And so like that was just something we like press record, and he probably just, played that off the top of his head. And it's just so sophisticated and catchy, and there's like a randomness and an agitation still to it. He kind of cycles on these things and then eventually resolves as he works down the scale. And like I was thinking, like it reminds me of like, if you watch like Olympics gymnasts, right? Who do some crazy like flip and all these turns, and then they stick the landing. Like watching Kyle like do that stuff was like watching that, but with like a beer in his hand the whole time, because like he was like I mean, and that's the moral of the story, or really like where this all ends, is like he was an immensely talented and brilliant person who grappled with substance abuse and addiction and depression for who knows? Yeah, I mean, as long as his entire, at least adolescent and adult life.
So Brad and I continued to have a conversation about Kyle that I felt would be more appropriate as a standalone episode. So following this episode next week, I will be posting an excerpt of this conversation. So please tune in next week for the excerpt. And now, back to the episode.
We've landed in a place where now we have a very different lineup. And so we're working on new stuff that is going to be a different approach. It sounds, to me, almost truer to what I think some of the things we've been trying to get after as a band. It's a little bit more folkier. Maybe we're more mature. We're now, 13 years older than when we started. And so, I don't know, maybe that's like a stereotype of like getting older as you get a little softer. But like, I think musically it'll be, stuff I'm excited to have people hear. And it's great to have, as much as, this absence of having Kyle in the band is always felt. The guys that we've been able to bring in, the friends, and Dave and Tim, they take us in a new direction. And that's the way it's been all along, is like anytime anybody has had to leave the band, we brought someone else in that kind of challenges you to do different things or approach something in a new direction, or wouldn't maybe necessarily do it the same way as the person before, and that's okay. So even playing older songs now, they become new iterations of those songs each time.
So there's a plan to record some new material, and
we recorded about 5 songs with our friend Matt Wenzel at his recording studio in Urbana called Shangri-Nah. And so he's done a lot of really great work. He produced about half of the Primitive Lights album there that I did there. He did the whole Vestiges album. You talked with Tom Dugan. He does the Falbonaughts stuff. He's in the Falbonaughts. So we recorded about 5 songs there, new songs. Half of us, I think we were kind of split. We thought, well, maybe we would release those as an EP. In this day and age, it just seems like you have to have content. You know, to put it out is better than to just sit on it and wait. But I think we've ultimately decided that we're going to add about 4 more songs to it and just try and put out a full-length sort of album. And, you know, so we've been finishing up writing and rehearsing some of those. And hopefully here in the next month or 2, I know Matt says he's getting real busy, we'll be able to get in and record a few more songs and then put out a new thing. So excited to have people here.
Champagne is Also a Band podcast is proud to support Jubilee Cafe. Jubilee Cafe is a free weekly meal program at Community United Church of Christ, 805 South 6th Street in Champaign, Illinois. Jubilee Cafe serves a home-cooked meal from 5 to 6:30 each Monday. Their mission is to feed hungry people by cooking healthy, delicious meals and by serving their guests restaurant-style with servers waiting on tables. Jubilee Cafe is open to anyone who cares to eat with them. Because food insecurity among students is so high, they serve students as well as others in and around the Champaign-Urbana community who struggle with hunger. Meals are free to all and will be served each Monday evening, located in the accessible lower level of the building at 6th and Daniel Streets in Champaign. For more information on the meal or how to volunteer, go to the Jubilee Cafe CUCC Facebook page or email them at jubilee.cafe@community-ucc.org. That's jubilee.cafe@community-ucc.org. Brad, what is your favorite venue?
Oh, that's changed a lot over the years. Well, like, what's open, and that's always been kind of like my answer at any given point in time. Was like, well, who has a stage and is booking my band,
right,
or is willing, or has the best shows that I'm willing to go to. That feels like it's not like. It feels like they're open to like giving people chances, and so there's always been a bar, it seems like, at any given point in time that has that kind of ethos, that they care about the scene, that they care about giving newcomers a shot, and that they actually treat the bands pretty well, and they just provide a great atmosphere to play in. And so over the years, occasionally, for a time it was Mike and Molly's, and then for us at another time, we were just, felt really at home at Memphis on Main back when it existed. Right. Now anymore, it's been, the Rose Bowl or Loose Cobra. Both of those bars right now, I think, are just doing a fantastic job for supporting music and encouraging people to come out and play their music or receive music in our scene. And it's no accident that those are owned by musicians. I'm just really thankful to have those at this moment in time, to have those places. Our friends at Bentley's are music lovers. Yeah. And so that they host music when they can. We do a Hogchute happy hour thing periodically out on the patio when the weather's nice. And so long answer would be all of that. Short answer would be any bar that, really seems to have an investment in promoting music and isn't doing so in a cynical sort of way.
What's your favorite concert that you've ever played?
Favorite concert that I've ever played? Well, the Opry any given year, I think, is always just such a good time. And it's not particularly about our set. It's just that that opportunity brings so many people around. Yeah. And I witness other great music, but I also witness like my friends achieve amazing things with their bands. I'm close with a lot of my friends' bands, and so we see each other's work pretty intimately. We hear it in rough phases and demos, and here's a bit that I'm working on. And so the way that a lot of bands I see like shape their stuff up and like really like knock it out of the park at the Opry is really encouraging to me. I'm like, God damn, like, wow. Like, I have some very talented friends. And so just being around those people has been just the best part of it. And in fact, like, looking back into starting this whole thing, like, I didn't have a lot of friends like in the music community before the Opry, and I felt like our band was kind of an island, and there was maybe like maybe it was just the time, or just us being young and not really having the maturity to like know like how to go about things. But like I sensed some like air of competitiveness between a lot of bands at that time, where it was like you were jockeying to be the bigger one or get the closing spot, which, by the way, like closing spot, you know, give me the early spot.
Yeah.
But there was something, you know, I started that because I felt like, I don't know, you know, like there was a very distinct like kind of band that was getting booked a lot around town, and we weren't very good. And so it was like, it wasn't like we were going to get booked at these big things. And so I thought like, well, maybe I'll just like throw a party for me and my, you know, my band. Like we'll have a little thing out in the woods. And I grew up in Monticello, and so I'd been to a show in high school at the Kalyx Center, and I went to one of the Barnstormer things there when I was in college, or grad school, I think, when it came through. And so I knew of the place, but I hadn't really met Bill, who owns it. And so I just kind of messaged him on the Facebook through their page, the Kalyx Center page, or found an email address or something. And I said like, hey, I'm from Monticello. I'm thinking about doing this country and folk music thing. You know, I went to a show at your barn years ago. You know, let me know if you think that's something you'd be interested in. And so he was like, yeah, I'm definitely interested in that. Let's meet. I'm grateful eternally that he took a chance to let me like put together something on his property to this scope, you know, and he's a pretty like private guy, right? You know, and he likes to have events and people out there, but they have to be kind of his events, you know, they have to be things that he believes in. And, you know, if people don't know, you know, I've been told that Bill was a tremendous banjo player and just a music lover. He was one of the founders of WEFT. He has a background in radio engineering and community. He's worked in Central America and South America, I believe, building radio stations down there, just, you know, out of the goodness of his own heart, essentially.
Holy cow.
So he's just a really generous, sweet person, I think, you know, that I've been thankful to have in my life, and that took a chance on letting us put on it, you know, now a semi-annual event at his barn out in the woods. It started really small with, I think, like 5 acts. I think by the second year, we tried to do 2 nights with about 5 acts a night. And I think that was quickly ditched because I was just exhausted. I'm already still exhausted at the end of one day, but like to do 2 whole days out there was just too much for me. There wasn't a demand for it at the time. The word hadn't really gotten out. But I'd say like by the 3rd year, you know, I'd already made a few friends along the way those first couple years. People that I knew I could depend on, who I thought like, oh, they kind of get it, and like they'll be good to have out. And opening access to like, you know, it's like almost that 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon sort of thing. Like, well, I know this person. They would really love to come out and play this thing. And I would be like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. You know, we're always booking. And, you know, by the 3rd year, I really felt like, I think by that year was the year that we had, like, I think the Fights came out. I think maybe Penny Horses were there. A number of other bands that I think we really became, like, very close friends with me, that are still very close friends, I think, with me and my bands, and now are very much intertwined in our own projects. Right. You know, Penny Horses is no longer, but it's become like 2 different bands. Colonel James Presents, which has a number of other people from like the Hogchute scene or the Fights or whatever it is, and Primitive Lights is Tim McGee's, and that has me and Cole from the Fights, and Johnny Davidson, who's been in a billion bands around town. We joke a lot about that. It kind of feels like the scene, at least our kind of circle, is somewhat incestuous. Right. It gets really hard to book practices and gigs, but it is nice because like I've never known that, to have like a bench of so many people that like, I know people who are like, well, I'm starting a project, who can I call? Well, here's like 30 names, you know, of talented musicians who I know are game because they come to the Snake Pit, or and they're looking for projects, or they're just, we know that they're of the right attitude, and that they make music a priority in their life, and that they're cooperative, and that they kind of have this ethos of like working together and doing the best, you know, not for any other reason other than because they love playing music, you know, or being around people who love playing music.
I feel like the musicians that come out to play the Hogchute, either the harvest or the spring, when they come out to perform at the Hogchute, they're playing like this is their masterpiece. Is that's
I'd
the
say
sense
that's fair. I mean, like, and that's how it resonates with me. Yeah. Like I watch like my friends playing these sets, and I'm like, holy cow, like this seems like professional level performance to me, and like these are just people I know, you know, and you know, and it's not to say, like, to clarify from earlier, it's not that they're not always great. You could see them at the Rose Bowl, they might sound amazing, but it just seems like people have come to really respect this event, and like there's a lot of energy when you arrive there, and people look forward to playing it, and I guess that comes across, and I'm just honored that it means that much to people, that this little thing that I would have, dreamt up would actually mean anything like that. It's just mind-boggling to me. But
I feel like not only does it sound good as a listener, but it also seems like it sounds great for the performer as well.
It's the barn, it's got those tall, even though they're like aluminum ceilings, they're so tall, it's like a cathedral in there. And like, even before Bob Hen gets out there and like sets up the sound stuff, I like to play the drums in the room just every once in a while. And like, I'm always just taken by all of that wood and that space. And just, I think the age of how old that barn is, must have something to do with it, that it's just a very warm spot to play, like the acoustics there. And I've always said, like, if I was going to do like a retreat and go and record somewhere and remotely, like that would be the place to do it. And we record every Opry, that Bob records through the board. And so we end up with tracks of people's sets. Everybody who plays, we have basically their performance recorded. And we try and single out songs, to put out compilations here and there. And I've gotten really lazy about that the past, I think, 3 events. I think we have still waiting to come out. It's been fun to do those, and also just to have an artifact of what it's like.
My favorite moment of this last year was seeing Angie Heaton in the Fights play, and I just felt like that was everything. I don't know. It's been so long since I've seen Angie play, and also, since the Fights had broken up, it was kind of this, memories and great
no,
moments.
There's a nostalgia, it seems, that a lot of people associate to it, just for that purpose, right? That, the Angie being able to, like, have a band for, to my knowledge, like, the first time in a while, like, having a band behind her and playing, like, out at a show like that. Like, she was fantastic, and, like, the Fights, like, to see them reunite in any sort of way is amazing, because just as a unit, those musicians are all so plugged into one another that, they just click. And so they've done that, with Angie, and they did that with our friend Christy Hayes. And I think that they enjoy doing that, right?
Champagne is Also a Band podcast is proud to support Exile on Main Street. Exile on Main Street, located in the old train station building at 100 North Chestnut Street in downtown Champaign, has been helping to build record collections since 2004. Carrying a wide array of new and used LPs, CDs, and video games. Exile on Main Street has something for just about any music enthusiast and old-school gaming devotee. Exile also hosts regular free live music shows on its stage, so be sure to check out their Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages for the up-to-date details on the next upcoming event. Open 7 days a week, they can be reached by phone at 217-398-MAIN. That's 217-398-6246. Brad, what is your favorite non-musical thing?
Okay. In my real life, my musician life is what I would consider like my alter ego sort of life. In my real life, I'm a visual artist and an instructor of visual arts and arts education. And so that's a very big thing that I'm involved in a lot. And that does overlap with my musical life a lot. I do posters, gig posters for all of the Opry things, and also for many shows around town. I love to do that. I stress out a bit about it, I suppose, a lot when I know I've got a deadline coming up, but it's something that I love to do. I've done album artwork for people, for Thomas from Vestiges. I did for his old band Patriot Patrol. I worked with Penny Horses. I did part of theirs in collaboration with Paige Spangler, who did a collage for their cover. I'm doing the new Tractor Kings artwork, ostensibly. Excellent. If they haven't replaced me, I've taken kind of too long. Sorry, Jake. But I'm excited about that. And so, that's what I love. I love art, visual arts. I do photography, animation, things like that, illustration. Digital arts is mostly kind of what I do. I love stuff like that.
How would you describe your particular style? I would say probably a 90% success rate of identifying if you did the art. How would you how would you describe that style?
I think I have a recognizable style, and like, I don't know how you would describe it other than, you know, some of the first early Opry posters, I was inspired by these old national parks, like WPA posters, which were really beautiful. So a couple of those, like, that was like an era of my work that I think I was really kind of trying to emulate that style. But I've also gotten just, you know, more and more focused on creating artworks. I think I have a really flat style. You know, I wouldn't say that I go realistic a lot. I think that I do iconographic a little bit, that I try and simplify things out to basic shapes. I like it to look vintage or handmade, even though it's not most of the time. It's mostly digital done. I don't know. How would you describe it? Like, I'd be interested in hearing that.
You know what it reminds me of? And not necessarily... I don't know why I always feel like I have to explain or like soften the blow of my suggestion, but what it always reminds me of is like construction paper pieces. Like you take... You don't... there's not really... I don't get a sense that there's ever any blending between...
Right.
And I know you do.
No.
I mean, it's
very much color separated. There's there's a shape that it's a certain color, and I'm not working in gradients a lot. I'm not rendering in like volumetric, know, stuff. It's, like I said, I think very flat, like paper-like.
Yeah.
The way I set it up, I try and think about it as though I was going to do a screen print. And I try and think about blocks of color as opposed to how simply can I do this in terms of color and shape and things like that.
Well, very T-shirt design. When you said like screen print, that, I mean, that's, they all look screen prints. Yeah, where there's very few variations of color, and that, you know, the red of the flame is also part of the red of the barn.
Right.
You may have a color palette of like 2 or 3 or even...
I do have some favorites that I go through, you know, some favorite color palettes. I find a lot of like red, black, yellows. Like that's I do those a lot. But those are bold colors. That's not an uncommon thing, I don't think. But
I really need to hit you up for some... to get the Hogchute posters from beginning to end.
I'd be happy to get those for you. And people are always asking me for copies of some of the back catalog posters. I'm hoping to get like a Etsy or something up online where people can get those. And, you know, anything that they would pay for that would go into the Opry. It'd be a way to support it and give us a little bit of a leeway in our budgets from year to year. So keep an eye out for that. If you're interested, if you've been searching for Opry posters, or we've got our CDs or compilations and things like that. Clayton and his partner Callie, they have been making buttons and magnets and bottle openers and things for us for years too. So we've got all sorts of ephemera and you know, accoutrement that we'd be happy to sell you if you'd be so willing to support the event, because it is a low budget, pretty shoestring sort of thing. But
it doesn't seem like it. Well, I mean, it just doesn't. It doesn't.
We do a good job.
I was just thinking, strangely enough, I was like, that would be almost a cool, I don't know, music project name, ephemera. Of course, it'd be like ambient synth
right, of course,
stuff, yeah. But I don't know why.
You wouldn't be able to quite put your finger on what genre it is.
That's right. But it'd be memorable. It'd be something you'd be able to take away in your
band
pocket.
name. That's one of my favorite things is coming up, like, is trademarking band names when people say them. I can't think of any good ones on the spot now, though. But
I don't know if you said you had other favorite non-musical things, or I mean, I feel like
art is really the big one. That's what consumes my life. Otherwise, you know, that's what I'm motivated to do. It brings me joy, and it's what I've devoted like my career towards, and it's what I hope that I can continue doing, you know, with my life.
Awesome.
If I could make a living just like producing art, you know, creating music, doing creative work like that would be a dream, right? You know, and I think that's a lot of us, and I see that in a lot of my friends and like the musicians, people who are immensely talented. And I just think, like, if we could all just do this.
Brad, thank you so much for coming on out to the Blue Box Studio and recording this episode with me and telling me all about your song Formaldehyde and sharing how the Hogchute Opry became a thing.
Of course.
And just your favorite non-musical thing. and I really appreciate you and what you do for artists in the Champaign-Urbana music scene. I feel like you do a great job of being a representative of what this scene could be.
Since I was a kid, listening to WPGU or looking in from the outside of like a farm kid looking into Champaign, always infinitely impressed about like, well, Champaign's like a real music town, right? If I could just play a show in Champaign, like that would be amazing, right? And so like I'm just blessed. I feel, that I'm in this position, right? I have so much faith in the people around me that it's mind-blowing sometimes. And I think we're a really special place. I put as much effort as I can into it, but I see many other people around me putting effort into doing it. You included, Sven.
Thanks.
What you're doing here, I think, is really important and fun to talk to,
Yeah, the time just flies right by. I can't even believe it. And,
it does. I'm 2 Budweisers in, and here we are.
Anyway, but thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Sven. Appreciate it. Thank you for listening to Champaign is Also a Band podcast. This is Brad Olson reminding you, great music is out there. Go find it where you live.
You almost have an NPR voice. It's so good.
Studio, South Bigger on the inside.